Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads, episode 117, Friday, August 12th. Might say it's the end of the summer, but it just seems like everything's ramping up. It feels like the community's ramping back up, like all the events are coming back, and we're actually going to be joined in just a minute by two of our longtime friends talking about some events that are coming up this late summer, early fall. So looking forward to talking about that. We're also on episode 7 of this series on de-risking. What does it look like to get the risk out of a product development effort? What does it take to do that? How do you approach that? And today is our concluding episode in that. We're going to be talking with two of our managers here at Into Being, Aaron Kehrer and Rick Routson, about their perspectives on this. How do they approach common problems and getting the risk out of product development? It's important to every company that's trying to develop a new product or a startup. So we'll get there in just a minute. But before that, save the date next month. We've been telling you about this for months, but save the date for Tuesday, September 20th in Kalamazoo, Michigan, the Medical Device Summit put on by MishBio. We're looking forward to that, now just a little more than a month away. And happening here at the end of August, our friends over at Fast Forward Medical Innovation at the University of Michigan are doing Research Commercialization 101. The basics of life science product development. In 2 episodes, they're going to do session 1, stakeholder mapping and identifying critical stakeholders, Monday, August 22nd. And it's just over the lunch hour, so you can tune in then. You can also go to session 2, which is value proposition design and customer discovery. Near and dear to our heart, things we've talked about on the show many times. They'll be doing that Wednesday, August 24th. From 12 to 1. So if you're interested in those, you can register at innovation.medicine.umich.edu, Research Commercialization 101, and you can attend that. Next up, we've got live with us, it's been a little while, but she's back with us. Stacy Frankovich from MedHealth is with us to introduce our friend Tricia and also the Aspire program. Stacy, are you with us?
I am here.
There she is, in the flesh. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's been a long time, and I am shocked. Episode 117.
Kind of weird, huh?
Wow. I remember when this all started.
Yep. You're one of our faithful early adopters, and we have always appreciated that, Stacy.
Yeah, we love being here. Thank you so much. So I appreciate you allowing me to come in today and promote this Aspire program. And I am going to turn it over to Tricia to talk more details about that. But just for the audience that doesn't know me, I am Stacy Frankovich. I'm the director of MedHealth. MedHealth is an initiative that was born out of Techtown, Detroit, that serves a cross-border coalition of those that are supporting medtech innovation and the adoption of medtech innovation that can impact lives and impact outcomes. So that's the really brief thing about me. I'll drop our website in your chat. I'll drop my email in your chat. If you have any questions, up our website in your chat. I'll drop my email in your chat. If you have any questions about MedHealth, please reach out. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Tricia Compass-Markman. She is going to talk about the Aspire program, which is a program that MedHealth runs annually with VentureWell. And this is targeted at innovators in the medtech space that are looking to raise some investment. So it's an investment readiness cohort. And she'll talk more about it, but we're going to put some people through some stress tests and have some fun this fall and get you ready for investment. And with that, I will turn it over to Tricia.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Jean. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Tricia Compass-Markman, a senior program officer at VentureWell. As Stacy said, we work closely with Techtown Detroit and MedHealth, and also with Jean's team at Into Being. We have our investment readiness program. It's focused on medtech startups. And it's all about getting yourself investment ready. So it's demystifying the investment process. What is due diligence? What does it mean to bring on investors? Negotiating term sheets, just going through all the nitty gritty of that. And you come out of the program set to feel confident and go off and raise your first round of equity investment. So it's a niche time in a startup's life, but just wanted to flag that we are recruiting startups right now. The deadline to apply is August 22nd. It's a really awesome program. As Stacy said, it's a lot of fun. We bring in kind of the key piece of it is we bring in mentors who are active investors alongside myself and my colleague on the teaching side. And you get to hear from investors, understand if you get a no or a maybe or a yes, you get to understand why. So it's a real safe space for that. We stress test, we get to run mock board meetings. So really encourage you to apply. We really want to get more Michigan-based teams and teams in the ecosystem there. If the slide deck is going, Jean, if you could shift over a couple slides there. We have kind of startup eligibility. It's typically for first-time founders where you haven't set off and raised investment financing yet. We do look for medical device or diagnostics preference, but I'm always happy to talk to you if you have any questions on what does it mean? Is this something I want to do? But again, flagging that August 22nd is our deadline. I am hosting an info session on Monday, August 15th at 6 p.m. Eastern. And I'll also drop in the chat my contact information. Super fun program, and want to thank again Tech Down Detroit, MedHealth, Stacy, Into Being and Jean's team. Really excited about it. And then I think, there we go. Session deadline. Happy to answer any questions, but thank you, Stacy and Jean.
Yeah, very cool. We've got the contact information there. Let's leave that up on the screen for just a moment more. Application deadline August 22nd, venturewell.org/aspire. And then what's the difference there between that session on the 15th there, Tricia?
Yep, the session on August 15th is an info session that I'll be hosting for interested startups. So if you're, hey, I want to learn a little bit more, it's a 1-hour session. Come on in. I'll go through the details, kind of the cadence of the program, the expectation, the goals. But August 22nd is actually the application deadline. And we hope it's a low lift. It's not a huge grant application. It's your exec summary, your standard investor pitch deck, a 1-page technical summary, and then a cover letter saying, yeah, I'll commit to the program. And I'm sorry, I forgot to say that the actual program is October 3rd through November 4th. First 4 weeks are virtual programming, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, about 2 hours per day. And then we're excited about being back in person. We'll be at the Tech Town Detroit offices on November 3rd and November 4th. So again, please come August 15th to learn more. If you can't make it, please reach out to me. I'm happy to have a one-on-one call. And August 22nd is the deadline for the startups.
That's awesome. Well, it's fun that you guys get to be back in person and using the space and having people together. How many groups are you expecting for this?
Great question. We typically have a cohort of about 10 to 15 startups, and then we have about a 1-to-1 ratio of the actual mentor investors come in too. So it's about 30 to 35 people, but again, 10 to 15 startups. Very cool. Well, Tricia, it's great to have you. I hope you have a wonderful event, and as we can help you promote that, we're always happy to. Thank you, Gene. Yeah, thanks for being here, and Stacy for being here. Stacy, anything final to add?
Individuals, while we want our Michigan companies to be there and we hope that they represent well, this is a program that allows international companies, national companies. We try to get a good mix of all of that so that we can bring in perspectives from different places. And our mentors and some of our speakers are often outside of Michigan as well. So it's a big program. It's a great one.
Well, that's awesome. We're thankful to have you here telling us about it, and people will continue to hear about it, and hopefully you get a great turnout for the first time back in person.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jean. We appreciate being here to promote this.
Good to have you, Stacy. Good to have you, Tricia.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not all the local news. Joined next by Jeff Reinfeldt himself from Renaissance Venture Capital. I believe he's on the line with us. There he is.
I am, Gene.
It's the question I have to ask you every single time. What's your background decor? How has it changed? That's not a minion I see back there. The two-hearted, I remember.
Yeah, the two-hearted, but that's just a stuffed animal basically back there that my youngest gave me. So yeah, I like it a lot. But then there's my lava lamps back there too that bring me joy. So yes.
I love it, Jeff. We always appreciate you and your support. And for the last year, you've also been a mentor to MedTech Crossroads, and giving us ideas and stuff. We've got some cool venture capitalist stuff coming up in the future, thanks to you. So I appreciate your being here. We've got a slide up. I want to hear more about it. The fall 2022 Undemo Day. Tell us all about this. And I know something to mention here. I know you guys had a sort of a unique one-off one. It feels like it was 6 months ago or a year ago. It was a little different. Is this one back to the normal format? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, last year, basically in the spring, we had, it was 6 months ago, basically, side of it, we had a DEI on Demo Day, and that was virtual, and it was much more Midwest focused. We're back to in-person in October, and we're just starting to open up applications. They actually did, the app just opened yesterday, so I wanted to come on here first and give everybody the news, basically side of it. This time, we're looking for just Michigan companies that are fundraising in the next 3 to 6 months. Like I said, we're back in person at Ford Field October 12th. And for people that don't understand on Demo Day, if you go to that URL, there's a nice video and a nice write-up side of things. But we attract about usually 200 investors in person, basically coming to Ford Field. And then the selected companies, which you usually get about 40 or 50 of them out of that, have about 5 one-on-one meetings and then a lot of networking time with those investors. It's free to apply, free to attend. Basically, you just sort of have to be there. The biggest thing we say is that, to get all these matchmaking done, we ask for everybody to get their applications in pretty early by September 7th because we got a lot of work on the back end because it's sort of double opt-in. So we'll send that out to all of our VCs. They sort of say who they want to meet with, and then we pick the ones that basically have the most meetings to be in person, and then we try to organize those other ones virtually after that. It's open to all rounds of funding, sort of pre-seed to growth stage. I've even got some venture debt people coming this time, and investors of all stages will be there. So for the other people, basically the investors, community members, Eugene, that registration is going to be opened up in another week, and I'll probably come back and tell you more about that. But this was a great lead-in. The Aspire people, once they're funding, sort of know where they have had their product market fit and sort of looking for that first round or their second round. This is a great way to have a half a day and meet a bunch of investors and get a lot of feedback, and then hopefully get an event, a round after that. I also want to mention that we're working with Tech Week this week, Michigan Tech Week, which is a brand new event sort of happening. And they're right after this, and they're organizing a pitch competition and a whole bunch of other great speakers and parties and things like that. So if you can make it 2 days out of it, we can show you the best in Michigan and introduce you to a bunch of great investors.
It sounds like an amazing thing to be at. Obviously, for the companies that are a little more mature, going for maybe a later round, they know how this works, and this is a great time for them to come and have access to, what did you say, nearly 200? We got the slide there somewhere.
Yeah, 200. It's right at 200. Virtually we've gotten over 400. We're sort of, saying, before COVID, we were getting 200. Hopefully we can reach that again and actually go closer to 300, 400 that we're getting virtually. So
that's really cool. A question for you, Jeff. I know we've talked on the show before with different investors at different stages about how much more access there is, and also oftentimes how much more information sharing there is among investors, whether they're at a angel stage or a VC stage. What would you say about this event for the early stage startup that's kind of going, when is it time to get that much exposure? How do I know if I'm ready to be in front of 200 people? And maybe part of the backstory is, guess what? They're going to share information. You better put your best foot forward the first time you put your foot out there. But what would you say to the earliest stage companies that might be considering coming?
Yeah, I think it always goes down to a fundraising strategy. I've talked to some people that share early and often, and it always is, we have the simple line. It's like, you're looking for money, ask for advice. If you're looking for advice, ask for money, basically. So, a lot of times there's a lot of people that talk and just say, hey, I'm going to be raising my seed round now. What are you looking for? What do you want, basically, side of? Or, they may be a seed investor and I'm not going to raise my round. That's why we say 3 to 18 months. We're not going to be raising for another 12 months. What do I need to be at? What stage would it sort of be at to basically invest? Now, there's other people that say sometimes if you release too much information, you can start to get overexposure inside the network. And that's another great strategy to do things. So there's no perfect way to do things, but I do, believe that you should have a plan and stick to that plan basically side of it, and understand who you're marketing to. This isn't marketing your product. This is marketing your company to investors that are buying part of your company. So it's a mind shift for some people, because they're not selling their product anymore. They're selling their company and themselves.
I think that's a really important one. We've seen a lot of startups where they're kind of going, oh, I got investors, I've succeeded. It's like, no, you sold part of your company. I hope that's what you wanted to do, right? Like it's a very important question. But
I've also seen decks too, where it's all just about the product, and I'm not buying the product, I'm buying your company.
Yeah. So tell me about the market, tell me about your team, tell me about, that's great.
Tell me how you're going to exit too. How are you going to sell your company? Yeah.
So if you got that plan, that marketing plan for selling your company to investors, then you'd be a good candidate for the Undemo
Perfect.
Day.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome.
Or even if you're just exploring it. Again, it is a good advice to basically say, hey, I'm going to be raising a seed in the next round, meet a bunch of people, get a bunch of great information, go back and execute, and then come back the next time when you're ready to raise.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Well, hopefully it's a wonderful event in person. Jeff, I also got to put you on the spot here, because I know you're good for it, and you've always got thoughts. We've been doing this series on de-risking. Like, how do you take the basic definition of risk from a financial perspective is, you could lose money at this endeavor you're undertaking. Well, welcome to the world of med tech, whether it's devices or pharma or whatever. And so in some way, the term just inherently applies. But as long as we've got you here, and before we go to our in-studio guests today, what do you think of when you hear the term de-risking in your industry as you practice it? And how do you practice something related to that?
I've loved your conversations about de-risking a product, because it's a deep dive sort of into one area that we as investors always look at. I mean, we're always going to have risk. I mean, that's what we're getting paid for. If it was no risk, basically a bank probably would be financing in this, and then you'd get the normal interest rate side of it. So, when a person that's investing in your company, they look at usually three different buckets of risk. Product is probably the first one they sort of look at, and that's the one they look at. The second one is usually the market. I mean, will the market accept it? If you build this, will they come, basically, side of it. And the last one is sort of financing risk. Each one of these may be, 0 to none. Basically, if you've got a product and it's selling and it's producing and I can make millions of them, the product risk is pretty low. But nobody may want to buy it, or next week they may not want to buy it. With a drug, sometimes the market risk is virtually zero. There's people, basically lining up around the door, basically at this product. There may be the product, can you make it in volume? And then some of these companies, we know we can make it. We know the people want it. The financing risk is just so large because you have to raise so much money. A lot of that is sort of, the Elon Musk, basically large manufacturing side of things. Some of these things, it's just, can you generate that much capital and generate a big enough return for the people that are doing that much capital? So again, we always talk about being paid for your level of risk. If you have all three of this, it's going to be much more expensive. Your money's going to be much more expensive than somewhere it's being de-risked about more of those things have sort of been checked off, or the risk in those is a lot less.
So you actually end up in a place where the company and you have to both decide, how much risk am I willing to bite off in this chew? But those categories are relatively well defined.
Yep, exactly. And we talk about them all the time. So, and again, that's always where you talk about pre-monies, post-monies. Those are where you have the discussions around, okay, I think I'm at this level and this is the way I should be paid for that. And other people are like, nope, this is the level I see you at. And the market basically tells you, and that's where you price around and get a term sheet. So.
And it's interesting how the differences between how different people perceive the level of risk. It matters, right? It's part of the.
It totally does. And the market's so small, basically, with these venture capital firms. There's a wide degree of sort of what people are willing to pay. And the market changes too. I mean, we've seen this basically the first 2 quarters. The market is not the same as it was basically at the end of 2021. 2022 has been rough for market valuations. And what was priced sort of at a certain price, it's a different price basically now that we're seeing in the market as venture capital sort of recalibrates.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate your perspective as always, Jeff. We'll have you back on. We'll be talking about Undemo Day for a while here, so we're looking forward to it. And again, I think it's even up on the screen right behind me. We can pop it up there one more time if you want to get to it. You can scan that or go to renvcf.com/undemo app and if you're eligible and you got that marketing plan for how you want to sell to investors, look Jeff up. I look forward to having you.
Perfect. And again, if anybody has any questions, we can all be reached at info@renvcf.com.
info@renvcf.com. Jeff, we appreciate
Perfect.
you.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Gene.
You're well, my friend. Well, that's great. And that brings us to the main event, the last episode in our de-risking series, de-risking medical device development. We promised you that August 5th and 12th we would talk to some of our staff about this idea. Now, it's a term that we've sort of thrown out there. It's not a term that's widely used in medical device development. We talk about risk management. That's something relating to the risk management standards, and everyone knows their FMEAs and risk analyses. But here we're taking sort of a broader idea of this term, and it really, we'll even take the Oxford English Dictionary definition. De-risking is making something safer by reducing the possibility that something bad will happen and that money will be lost. And so we just talked to Jeff. I mean, that's the major concern of those who are putting money in and investing in such an endeavor. They want to see that it's going to turn out in the end. But it's something that has to live with the process. You've always got to have this mentality of, how am I going to get the risk out? What could happen next? You have to be just a little bit aware of what could be coming down the road and continually take that risk out as you go. Of course, this isn't just a thought experiment. There comes a point where you just have to haul the wood and do the work. And so it's this balance between when do we think about it and when do we just charge forward, pour on the gas, and get things done. And so here, week 7 of the series, the last week of this series, I'm joined by 2 members of our management team, Aaron Kehrer and Rick Routson, both in studio with me. Welcome, guys. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's like to get true, real engineers like you guys are, to talk in a studio. I feel so thankful and so blessed, truly, because you guys are always doing the good stuff, but we want to give a minute to talk about it and talk some of the philosophy behind it. We had a chart that we'd put together beforehand, and last week when we were talking with some of our other staff about their approaches, like, okay, we're working on CAD or something like that, and one of the themes we heard last week was, how quickly can I get into the physical realm? Sure, it's great to stand here and try things but in CAD, but I got to get this thing out there and I've got to see if it works. It's this fail fast mentality or iterate mentality. We talked about how there are some tools which might give you an idea of where you want to go, but they're not actually going to answer the question. You don't actually answer the questions until the rubber meets the road. We're going to go up a level this week, right? We're going to talk sort of about, we've got areas, we've got things like clinical expertise because we work with clinicians all the time. We've got engineering development area where we live. There's manufacturers. We sit in our space and we prototype, but there are manufacturers who can make thousands of parts. And there's this regulatory world that we see ourselves interacting with. I'd love to have you guys help me frame this just a little bit. Aaron, I know when we were talking about it, you said processes don't manage us, we manage the processes. So we're talking at sort of a meta level here, but tell us what you meant by that.
So I think when we were thinking about it in terms of, there's often processes for doing certain things, whether it's designing something or running a risk analysis or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But people can get into a mentality where they just need to execute the process and then they'll be okay, in the end. And it really comes down to, are you choosing the right process for the given stage you're in the whole product development? Because if you're really early stage, you don't need to be running a full deep dive FMEA on a design that you're just rapid prototyping, because in the future you're going to be shifting. You're going to be shifting your manufacturing methods to something else. So, spending the time doing an FMEA on something that is not your final, execution direction is not the process you want to be running at that point.
That's a great example of it. I think you and we've had people come to us and we'll mention the word like risk analysis or risk management, and they'll say, oh yeah, I hired somebody and they made me an FMEA. And you kind of go, wait, that's not what I meant. Because Rick, and you've done and taught on risk management any number of times for folks. This is not something that's a one-time you turn the crank once and then you did risk management, right? This is actually something that lives with the product.
Right. It's a living process, a living document is the output of it. But even from the earliest stages where this is really where you need the clinician's help. The clinician who most likely is the one who brought the idea for a prospective medical device. You start with asking what does this device intend to do? What could go wrong? How it interfaces with and can impact the patient. And then that goes deeper into then how are we going to, from a high level, how can we achieve that engineering wise? And as Aaron was alluding to, when you start with just early developmental type prototypes, you won't know the detail. So the number of things you look at within an FMEA or risk analysis might be kind of small. As as a design matures, it progresses, it becomes more detailed. Then you have to keep going back to that risk analysis and through this process of going, okay, now these are the tools that we have designed into the device to do this function or to do this function, or how these functions come together, and what happens when one function fails and how is the other one. And so after that first analysis where you're just kind of at the high levels, maybe focusing more on patient patient risks in how the device interacts, then you start to get into more of the risks of the design itself to achieve that, and how are potential risks of the device going to impact. And so there's this cycle that you have to go through a number of times as the product development matures. Because if you didn't and you got to the end, then you would be missing all of the re-looking at what you've designed into the product.
The actual details that weren't, what's really interesting about what you're saying is those details weren't even available at the outset. So like even if somebody said, oh, I'm going to check the risk analysis box. We're talking about one tool here, right? Risk analysis, 14971. And what I hear you saying is, even if somebody walked in at the outset and said, I want to check that box, it's not addressable because you haven't gotten to that point in the process yet.
Right.
That's a fascinating point. So this is what we're sort of alluding to here, is why processes from a de-risking standpoint aren't just sort of one-off tools that we follow the pattern and then we're done. It's something you have to decide when to apply. I think it's a great example.
Because you can also think about it in terms of, you have an idea and it's probably going to be plastic, and so that means it's probably going to be injection molded. So you think your first step is to go to an injection molder and say, hey, I need this. I need you to make this for me, when you haven't gone through any design work beforehand to look to, okay, is the concept even feasible the way I'm envisioning it, and then is it feasible in plastic, and then is it even manufacturable in the way it's been designed, in that manufacturing method. So we often see clients coming to us who had first gone to a vendor like an injection molder or a thermoformer or something like that, and getting pushback from them because they don't have a design, and design consideration for that manufacturing method hasn't been considered. And so that's another one of those areas where if you think you know the process and you pick the wrong, you kind of get ahead of things, and so now you've got the process where you've got an injection molder, and so now everything's focused on, how do I make sure they get what they need, when in reality that might not be the actual
next
endpoint
step
that you're going for. Yeah.
It's interesting. So that's another example of a place where somebody might have heard of a process or heard of a tool, and they're like, oh, I need a manufacturer. Well, the answer isn't no, you don't need a manufacturer. It's a sequencing question, like Rick was saying a minute ago. It's do we actually have enough information at this point in the process to utilize a tool? And many times we've seen the answer in the manufacturing case is no, we're still not there yet. It's an inappropriately sequenced thing. Those are great examples. Let's just sort of talking about if we're in a domain, although we've bridged a little bit here between sort of engineering development and manufacturing and showing one of those kinds of issues. Just the other day I had somebody reach out and they want to do a 510K. And so it's like, well, I need to start writing my 510K, and then you find out that, well, okay, but there's things like design controls that have to happen before you would even have the information to be able to write the 510K. So it's great that you want to do that next, but I can't give you the 510K writing tool next because you haven't generated what you'd need to push through that tool to get there. And this sort of brings us to this idea of translation between these domains. Like there are processes that we'd run in a domain. Like if you're a clinician, you've got all sorts of processes that you run. If you're an engineer, there's processes that you run. If you're in manufacturing, there's processes that you run. I think some of our focus today is going to be on really translation, right? It's almost a language problem, because the way that your clinician speaks and the way that your engineers speak and the way that your manufacturer speaks and the way that your regulators speak, they're all different, right? It's kind of one of the big problems that we find ourselves often fighting. I guess to focus our minds a little bit, I guess Rick first with DHF and then Aaron with DMR, these TLAs, right, three-letter acronyms that we have. A lot of knowledge in medical device, at least, gets funneled through these two files, if you will, or these two records. Tell us about DHF, or Design History File, Rick.
So a design history file, which is what DHF stands for, contains all of the controlled documented information that you've generated during the product development process. It's a way that helps down the road when it comes up and we say, well, I remember we tested that, 3 years ago, and you're scrambling looking through your files trying to, do you have the right revision? Was it a draft? Was this just a, which test report are you talking about, or which drawing of the part, which specifications? And so it contains, from a regulations, FDA regulations standpoint, it contains your inputs, which would be user needs, what the clinician needs the device to do. It would contain design outputs, which is, so this is the output of the device based on a set of requirements that was developed, identifying how to get to those user needs that meet consensus standards that FDA points to organizations like ISO and IEC. And so it contains those requirements, it contains the output specifications of what your device does. And then it also contains, we talked about the risk analysis, and it also contains all the verification and validation, the verification that the outputs meet the inputs, the validation that the device, when used by a production representative, early device, pre-production, production intent device, meets the user needs when used by a clinician in a simulated use practice. So it takes all of that work that you do through the development process. It can include additional information as you see fit, and it all keeps it organized and together so that later down the road, if you make a design change or FDA comes for an audit, and why did you do this, and when you made this change, how did you verify that this would not cause a problem? You can go to your device or design history file and find the right information that you hopefully recorded and executed and stored up there.
It's interesting. I've never quite used this term for it before, but just even hearing you talk about it again, it's almost like a brain for your project knowledge at some level, right? Because now the linkages between why did we do that? Oh, we did that because of this requirement. Or how did we prove that that requirement was met? Oh, it was over here. It's kind of all this interrelated information. That was a great description you gave, Rick. And that's kind of in just stark contrast to the DMR, the device master record, which Aaron can give us a little rundown on, which is not so much about linking knowledge from inputs to outputs and verification validation.
Yeah, so the DMR, the device master record, is just a collection of documents that define everything that's needed to produce the device. So this is your drawings and your bills of materials and material specifications, any kind of inspections you want to do, any kind of quality control inspections you want to do, procedures for that. The work instructions that go into assembling the product, all that kind of stuff falls under the DMR grouping. And I think one of the things that early on, when I was just learning this, it says design history file and device master record. They sound like they're singular documents, but they're really actually collections of documents. So I think thinking of it more in that terms of it's a folder where all of a certain type of documents all kind of exist, so that you can use them for whatever they need to be used for.
I've even encountered some small companies that would come and say, "Oh, I've got my DHF," and you get a single Word doc that's 10 pages long. And you go, "Okay, that's not the thing." And even if it was, changing that would be very, very hard because you don't actually want to re-release the entire document just to make one little change. No, that's a great point. So we've got the DMR, which is kind of like the current recipe, right, for the thing. What's that? Is it America's Test Kitchen or something like that? This is maybe the distinction between DHF and DMR. We've got, most people are used to just a recipe, but DHF is like, how did you get to that recipe? How did you get to? I've never actually used them, so that was not
the Cook's Illustrated stuff where there's 10 pages of how you pick the lobster you want to pick, and then one page with the recipe on it, right?
And that's the DMR there at the end. Yeah. So it's kind of cool that at least in this industry, you do have these kinds of, I won't say documents, but document files, like you said, Aaron, that give you some structure and some direction. Like if you populate those correctly, you will have been thinking about a lot of the translation here between these domains.
I think to touch a little bit back on the process thing is a lot of people think that there's templates for these.
Yeah, thanks.
Right?
Good.
And there isn't there are generally things that go into these collections of documents, but there isn't a one single template for what goes into these things, because it's very dependent on the product you're developing and then how you're actually going to accomplish the manufacturing of that product.
This goes back to the reality that medical device, for example, contains so many different things. It's tongue depressors to heart-lung machines, and the companies that build them might be 3-person companies, and they might be 10,000-person companies. So what does it take to manage that? It's quite a variety. I think it's a very important point there. Well, as we talk about translation tools or techniques or processes that we like to use, on the show we've talked a lot about in-domain processes, like, okay, it's time to do risk analysis, or we talked recently about standards, like make sure you've got a standard and you're thinking about it. And I'm sure we'll touch back on those today, but I know one of the things that we're interested in is, as you have seen projects and you kind of go, okay, here's a place where the translation between these domains becomes challenging. How do you go about solving it, or what happens if it's not solved correctly? That's kind of where we want to go next. And we've talked a lot of times on the show about testing your user base, right? And does the user actually want this? And I know early on we had some examples where it was like, amazing success of the project, from napkin sketch to FDA clearance, and then find out not enough user engineering. Any tidbits of like, what does it feel like when you're on the wrong path or get on the right path of getting the users involved? What are some translation problems and solutions that you've seen?
Well, one thing, there was a project early in my career, was that a clinician came with a project that had a use that they saw in their field. It was to address that. It was a great idea, and this is one that we were able to help them take all the way to 510K clearance. It turned out there was a bit of a struggle with other user acceptance of the device to be used as the inventor predicted it would, and that there is a risk, and I learned from this, is that a lot of times because of the one of those boxes that we as medical device developers know least about would be the clinical expertise, and so in this case, they had preconceived how they would use this device, and their brain was tracked to use it in that way, but to bring it upon someone new that didn't know how to use it. There's paradigms of use that have to be overcome, and in that case there might not have been enough clinical user discovery. Is this device, as the inventor intended it to be used, going to be accepted? Because in this case it probably wasn't. And while the device ended up doing everything it needed to, and if it was used in the manner for which it was designed, it worked. But the challenge, hindsight for this one, and we're talking about the overall method of de-risking, is went through the whole development process, the regulatory process, and it ended up that they had difficulty for market acceptance, because it was, in hindsight, not exactly what other users wanted to have for a device.
And it's kind of amazing because, like, you can have a vision and you can be right about your vision, and your vision works, and you can use your vision exactly like you envisioned it, and you can get all the way through the process. And yet, if others don't want to use it the same way that you think it should be used and can use it,
and I think
there's a miss.
I think that's the biggest challenge for us in our role is, if you look at those 4 boxes, as I mentioned a moment ago, that clinical expertise is the one that I sort of throw up my hands and go,
better bring it, guys.
I didn't go to med school. I didn't. But so there is a bit of like, okay, well, I trust you. But now I've seen through that experience to ask the questions of, to be thinking about, well, I may not have an MD after my name, but I can ask the inventor. So are you taking this concept to people that aren't maybe your best friends, or people that you haven't been speaking with about this, and see if it would have that market acceptance before you go into a costly product development cycle of, because so some of the other boxes, we talk about engineering development, and in essence you could say we as engineers, we do bring our knowledge of manufacturing to the table, so that we can look at things and go, I don't know if that's going to be able to be made in a mass production, or at least we're going to have to design with those aspects in mind. Of, you can 3D print anything. You can have, it's the magic of 3D printing, which can be a danger of, say, an inventor could bring something and say, here, I had somebody make me this. They took my napkin sketch and they came back with this, and now I want you to turn, it needs to be like this. Now go ahead and put real CAD together and have it manufactured, and
it may have to look entirely different, but
it's like it's not exactly going to work that well. So we that's another type of bridge that that we, if we think about that while we're going through the development process, we can de-risk getting to okay, well, here, I put this design together, you paid me a lot of money, and I came up with this design, but I didn't even think about manufacturing. I just came up with this design, and somebody's going to magically make it. They're going to make one every day on a 3D printer, and it'll work. But that's the way we can de-risk, is if you start thinking about those manufacturing methods while you're developing
in the process. It's a really interesting point you bring up, Rick, that working with Into Being or a good product development firm, whoever they may be, you're hopefully going to get a lot of this de-risking that goes on between the manufacturing world and the design world. And where we had sort of started was this clinical to market jump where, like you said, okay, I'm not an MD, but I've seen enough to ask the question of the MD and know, did I get a good answer? Because I know what it would look like if you had actually done that legwork, guys, versus not.
It's like when we learned early on what point of care means, right? Because it's a point of care diagnostic system. I mean, you're thinking of, okay, it's in the doctor's office, like your general practitioner doctor's office, and they're going to be able to run a diagnostic test for you. But we developed a system that did PCR testing, and it was a 45-minute turnaround, for the test. But in reality, point of care within the space we were attempting to sell into was, it was 15 minutes or less.
That was a fascinating one, because if you couldn't do it in 15 minutes or less, no one wanted it on the floor. It was going to go to the central lab anyway. And so therefore you had this step function. Interesting how often step functions create problems in client or commercial acceptance. Or
think of it now with all the COVID testing, where it's like, well, if you had to wait 45 minutes before you knew, everybody's doing the antibody tests these days just because they're a 15-minute test, and if those didn't exist, and it was you had to go in and you had to wait 45 minutes before you could go to work because you had to wait that long, or it's like even those are now 24-hour turnaround kind of a thing, because it's more efficient to batch them.
Which side of this line you fall on? If I'm less than 20 minutes, okay, fine, I'll wait for it. But if I'm more than that, the difference between 45 minutes and 2 hours and 3 hours doesn't matter one bit. It may as well be next day. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. If we look for just a minute between the clinical expertise and the regulatory world, that's a place where we often find ourselves having to connect two groups thinking to de-risk the, something that could happen there otherwise. One of the things we've talked about is design controls and just even understanding, am I even ready? I've got this idea, great, but I'm not ready to write a 510K like we talked about earlier. Another interesting one, though, that kind of passes through engineering development and manufacturing and all the way from clinical expertise, right? Because you need your clinicians as a part of, if you have to validate the product, you need your actual users there. And FDA is going to look at that. But Rick, tell us just a bit about production intent parts, because we've got this place in the process where FDA needs to hear something, but they need to hear it in the right way, and it goes all the way back to our clinicians who are busy and ready to go try something.
Right. So there's at least, I'm just going to talk about these two areas where you'll need to provide verification testing in terms of biocompatibility. A device that is going to contact the patient, especially if it's internal to the patient and anywhere, needs to have the biocompatibility risk assessed, and it in almost all circumstances has to be very safe. Now, I'm not talking about life-saving, urgent care type devices. Let's set those aside for a minute. That might only be able to, be designed in so many ways. But there is biocompatibility of the devices so that it's not going to adversely affect the patient, especially days, weeks, and after, and for prolonged periods of time. And so that's can be considered potentially a checkbox to a startup, and say, oh, we got to get biocompatibility testing done, and early on in the process, when we come up with some first, we're thinking about the materials. What are we going to make this out of? And so there is a temptation of, hey, let's take those first prototypes where this really looks like the device that it could end up being, and let's make sure we get those tested for biocompatibility. Well, that's too early, and in terms of de-risking for cost, to run that, you're going to need to rerun it later, because the parts that need to be verified for biocompatibility need to be production representative materials off of production representative processes, means you need to have the tooling, and they need to be handled and assembled by the actual production intent suppliers. So often early in the projects and in development, you're working at prototype houses, you're farming it out to someone else, you've got some engineers that are handling the parts, not in a clean room, because it's not, these parts may never even, the intent isn't even that they're going to go into a live person. And so it's like, hey, this is just like it is, and let's go run it off. It's no, you have to have it assembled and manufactured as it would if and when the device is cleared. So that's one aspect of that. The other would be production intent devices need to be used for validation by the users, and it's an FDA requirement, and it's almost to where it pretty much should be done at the production facility you're going to do it. There is room to not do it, but the device needs to be manufactured and assembled with those as what they call production representative.
It's really interesting because as you talk about it, so many of these de-risking things that we find ourselves doing sort of instinctively, grabbing a process or grabbing a statement and kind of going, wait, hold on. It turns into, oftentimes the direction of a project, there's nothing wrong with saying, I want to be ready to sell, or I want to be ready to manufacture, or I know I need to do testing. I want to get there as fast as I can. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great, and it's what drives the project. But then to your point, it's like, okay, so if we took that step today, if we did that test today, to your point of biocompatibility, what's the likely outcome? And if the likely outcome is you wouldn't have data you could submit to the FDA, or you'd fail the test, and we can say that today, like that's really the heart of de-risking there, just to coin the term, right?
Right. Sometimes done in the proper way, you can. There's value in taking. There's certainly value in taking early, even validation in the sense you can't put it into a human body, but for put it in the hands of a intended user, a physician. It's like, does this have the feel? Does it have the function? We can, we're just gonna put it on a plastic dummy model of a person where you can, pretend that that's you could be as a clinical representative environment with the body as you can do at this point, but it doesn't need to be high cost, because that is going through GLP or good laboratory practices for testing early on. That's costly and time consuming, and often is you don't carry the value at the end. You don't get what you put into it in terms of the money. So early on, we would say, yes, let's do testing that can bring value to this point, but let's make sure we're minimizing your cost, because you're going to have to do this again when you get to that point where you could actually have results you could submit with an application for clearance.
That's a great point. So one of the big values of de-risking is you don't have infinite funds to spend. So you got to make sure when you pull a trigger that you like the value you're going to get for that money. And like you said, maybe you're going to get some value out of it even though you didn't pass the test. Well, sure, but you ought to know that up front, right? I think that's part of the point, is you ought to know that up front if that's what the result is going to be. Those are great examples. Guys, I feel bad, like we need a 3-hour show to cover this topic, because I'm looking at the notes that got put together, and we're actually at the top of the hour here. I want to give just a couple extra minutes here, because there's one more that I wanted to touch on that I think you brought up, Aaron, which was this concept of what happens when we're here in engineering development. We think we know what we're doing. We've got a really cool engineering team. A lot of times there's young engineers that come out and they're doing great design work. You finish the device design, then you sit down and you read the standards. Do you have sort of a sense of that? That's a common failure mode.
Yeah, I think we've run into it. It's the situation a few different times where people have cranked through a design. They've come up with a really good design, but they haven't considered the standards that the design has to pass. A lot of, especially for electrical equipment, there's a lot of standards. And it's for medical devices that are going to be contacting patients, there's even more standards. And so, the design has gone all the way through, and you're ready to kind of go to the organization, get it standards tested and stuff like that, and then you realize that you've incorporated something into the device that would be defined as an alarm, and there's a whole standard around alarms and what the different meanings are for alarms, and what the different sounds and tones are, and light colors and all that kind of stuff are for alarms. And you just happen to design your device where when it has an alarm, it flashes a blue light, because blue lights are cool. But in reality, that light is, by the standard, has to be red. And so, and if you haven't taken into consideration the standard and done the design and send it off to UL or TUV or whoever, BSI or whoever, well, they're gonna fail it like right away. But you're already out all the money, because you got to pay up front for those tests. So you're out multi-tens of thousands of dollars, and they don't. Your device only spent 3 days at the standards house because they immediately failed it because you didn't take into consideration the standards that you were testing to when you were doing the design work.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's yet again an example of a place where you're ready to take a step, you'd like to take a step, the step seems meaningful and rational. And really it's a great place to end this series on de-risking, is that to take that step and end up with your face in the mud is a really bad outcome at that point in time. But to say, no, we need more information, then this step will be valuable. We didn't spend that powder, but we have the answer, and now that step's going to be successful. That's like the ultimate example of it working. That's great. Well, guys, I really appreciate you taking the time today to do this, and always so much fun. Like literally with the notes that we had beforehand and all the knowledge in your heads, we could have gone for 3 or 4 hours here, but we're at the top of the hour. We appreciate being with us today. Thanks to Jeff and Stacy and Tricia for being part of the discussion too. We're looking forward to all these fall events that are coming up. And since we're just past the top, we're going to close it here and look forward to seeing you next week on MedTech Crossroads for episode 118. Thanks for being with us today.